I just want to reflect on how exciting it is to be around so many city builders. Yes, I'm a fintech founder, but I'm a city nerd at heart. And so being around so many people who share that passion, and not just share that passion, but are acting on it, has been energizing. And it's been a really wonderful day so far, so thank you. I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel, Talent as an Anchor Tenant, New Cities to Support the Digital Economy. Throughout history, cities have been shaped by the industries they serve. Whether it's finance, logistics, manufacturing, each has left their own imprint. Today, we're entering a new era, one that is increasingly built for and by talent. That raises the question, what happens when your anchor tenant is not just a factory or a port, but a fast-moving tech company, or a world-class university, or even an artist collective with some great big art? As Stephen Jennings highlighted in the first keynote, 40% of the global workforce will be in Africa. That means that this is only more important for this continent. And as someone who lives in Lagos, along with a couple other people in the audience, we see every day how both there is dynamism that comes from massive agglomeration, but also challenges that come from when infrastructure is not built as quickly as it could be. In this conversation, we'll explore both how public and private leaders are designing new cities and reimagining existing ones. You'll hear from leaders who are planning next-generation smart cities, like Kanza Technopolis City. Please join me in welcoming Anne to the stage. Developing digital and physical economic zones, like Etana and the CEO of Etana, Mayowa, who will be joining us hopefully later. Scaling tech-driven commerce across Africa through Wasoko. Please join me in welcoming Daniel to the stage. And finally, building the governance layer for new cities, somewhat a la double GDP, with tools for the common. Please join me in welcoming Hugo. We'll begin with 30 minutes of discussion, followed by 10 minutes of audience Q&A. So if you have any questions, please be sure to jot them down. And with that, let's get started. So my first question, which, Daniel, if you don't mind starting, each of you is building or shaping a different kind of city. What's the core problem or opportunity that your work is trying to solve?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel. Thank you, Justin, for the introduction. I'm the founder and CEO of an e-commerce company called Wasoko, which has also merged and expanded now to cover 6 different African nations. So it started here in Kenya, expanded to Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, now also covering Egypt and Morocco. And so for us, we've really focused on how can we help the small businesses, the mom and pop stores, the dukas here in East Africa to access their products and goods to serve their community faster, more efficiently, and at the lowest cost possible. So we built out not just the e-commerce technology, the app and the interface for that, but actually the whole logistics network behind it, warehouses, last mile delivery, so that a shopkeeper can order rice, soap, sugar, toilet paper, and have those goods delivered to their store next day free of charge. On the back of that, we built out all sorts of financial services to also help support these small businesses. But for us, improving the cities and making them more responsive fundamentally to the needs of not just their citizens but also their businesses is a core tenet of what we rely on in order to grow and scale our business. And so for us, we were very excited to be a founding partner of Silicon Zanzibar, which there are a number of different stakeholders here that have been involved in building out and scaling different initiatives that are part of that. And so for us, as a company, it was really exciting to be able to partner actually with the Zanzibari government to actually look at a lot of the policies and the environment there and kind of figure out what are some of these bottlenecks that are inhibiting businesses like ours and the many that maybe don't yet exist because they haven't had the best environment to do so, to ultimately set up operations, scale up, and create the millions of jobs that we need to across the African continent. So I'd say that's been our experience in terms of helping to innovate and partner with governments in building better cities.
And one thing I love about your story, Daniel, is you identified an issue you saw in African cities, created a company around it, and now are contributing to the building of cities. So it's come pretty wonderfully full circle. Mayo, if I could ask you the same question for you. You are the incoming CEO of Etana. Congratulations. You have big shoes to fill. The community loves Lukman and E, of course. And I'm curious, what's this problem or opportunity set that you're solving?
So before I talk about Etana, let me take the opportunity to thank you and obviously the organizers of this event. I think there's a potential for a lot of good to come out of it. My name is Mayowa Olungbile, and I'm the CEO at Etana. At Etana, we believe that every serious growth company in the world will eventually eye Nigeria as a key part of the African opportunity. Now, a lot of them turn away because, typically when they run into issues with slow paperwork, with not being able to find the right people, with unpredictable regulation, with currency issues, it becomes a serious bottleneck. That's essentially why Etana exists. So we're here to be that interface to really fix that problem. Now, to answer your question about, how special zones think about opportunity. First of all, it's been fun engaging with all the content that has come out of this event. I think my job here is to bring it all together and also move us back to first principles about why zones exist in the first place. Because in these conversations, there's a potential to get lost in the complexity. It's a complicated business sometimes, and I think this usually inhibits our ability to really communicate properly about what special zones are. So we may have a panel like this and people may still have a challenge understanding what the hell is going on with the zones. Now, the best way I can go to first principles on this is we all come from families, and at each point in time, your family is going through a specific challenge and requires sometimes some special solutions. For example, in my house, we've gone through a lot of transitions, and sometime in the course of this year, we decided, hey, you know what? We need to recommission one of our other rooms as the office space because the other one got too small. At some point, it may be that, the work being done in that office is no longer relevant, and maybe the kids need to learn a new skill to think about African communities. Now the kids need to learn a new skill to sustain the family, no longer the dad or the mom. Now a new solution needs to be developed for that. The reason I'm bringing this analogy up is to say special zones aren't one thing, and there's not one way to do them. It really depends on, how will I put this? Ideally, special zones are government initiatives or government-led initiatives, but fundamentally, they must be co-created regardless of whether it was initiated by the government or not. The reason is because special zones can't succeed without a fundamental alignment with the territorial priorities. So here in Nigeria, for example, we have to look at what the future says and what role Nigeria needs to play in that future. We still need to mobilize investment. We need to mobilize our talent. We need to make Nigeria, for example, fundamentally the hub with, through which people can trade with Africa. So what do? We localize the policies and the conditions that can help us achieve that. That's how I would answer that question.
And very well said, Mayowa. I think you've hit on one of the themes that I was hoping to come out, which is cities are only as great as their social fabric. That's at the family level, but it's at a number of levels too. Passing over to Anne, and you are at Konza Technopolis City. What are the opportunity set and challenges that you're trying to solve?
Okay, thank you. Architect Hannah from Konza Technopolis, as said well by yourself. And Konza Technopolis is a project by the Kenyan national government. And actually, it was developed in around 2011, 2012, and feasibility studies were done. And by then, government was looking at double digits in economic growth. Now, Kenya by then had economic growth within coffee, tea, and also athletics. But now they needed knowledge-based economy so that Kenya can be developed country or come to second world as we proceed to first world. So government developed Konza Technopolis to bridge in the gap on economic pillar. So the project is part of the Vision 2030. But as we do the developments, we looked at the demographics and which type of people and age that would then come in handy for technology businesses. And so Konza being a greenfield, we've looked at information technology enabled services, we are looking at engineering, we are looking at biotechnologies. But we are more so looking at enabling the young generation in Kenya through giving them the knowledge to do online jobs so that we create an employment database which then can be employed in Kenya and outside Kenya. So that's why you say Konza is a global technopolis. We're looking at being the referred smart city in this part of the world. Of course, there's been challenges, not that we developed from a greenfield. And in Konza, we are talking of infrastructure as a service, supporting the rest of the developments here. And as you had said earlier, in smart cities, you'll find data centers or universities as hunger tenancy. So with the challenges of greenfield from infrastructure, we are lucky actually to announce that our phase 1 is completely developed with infrastructure to support more than almost 200 investments in the Technopolis. Government has already injected a lot of money around that. For the first time, we are looking at green certifications for building as they come up in Konza. And we are using renewable energy. Generally in Kenya, we are known to have 90% of electricity being green, but we have embodied all the other energy, renewable energy developments, including waste to energy developments within the Technopolis. But I want to mention that Konza has a national impact in knowledge-based trainings because we are leading in the innovation hubs, which we are doing throughout the country. We've partnered with technical colleges. We're also doing part of 1,450 innovation hubs which are being developed in each ward. Ward is the smallest governmental administrative organ within the country within this country. So for a smart city, they need to thrive and support knowledge-based economy. We must be having a national data center because a lot of data is being created. Our national data center is already up and running at the Konza Technopolis with all the redundancies within the country. We've also developed the first of its kind technology university. We call it Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, which is based in STEM, and soon we'll be doing robotics at Konza. We are unique in that we are the first city to have a drone zone because we are looking at drone technologies, and this we've been given approval by Kenya Civil Aviation Authority for drone manufacture and also testing for what we call BVLOS, beyond visual line of sight. And that is the first of its kind in this region. If you look at the market in Africa, drones are imported, but there's a big market for that. And that is actually being done by our young people here in the country. So we are creating jobs within the technology of drones in Konza. And We have collaborations with the United Nations, UNDP. We actually launched what we call Timbuktu Technology Hub last year, and this one attracted around 47 countries from Africa participation. And this is around still growing the knowledge around different applications across the board, from engineering to information technology to business processing outsourcing. So in a nutshell, we are geared towards giving government back about 2% to GDP. That's about $2 billion per year, and that is our target as we go towards completion of the city as it approaches 2030 and fulfill our economic requirements in the Vision 2030. Thank you.
That was great, Anne, and I think you did a great, also a wonderful job of highlighting the intersection of physical, world-class universities' talent and the digital. And the digital is a good segue to Hugo, who runs Tools for the Commons, which is thinking through some digital tools that can be used in cities.
Obsession at Tools for the Commons is to make what we call the ascending world, not to call it the global south and not to call it the proud south, extremely competitive, not only in terms of importing and closing the gap in terms of governance, but in terms of producing and exporting the best possible governance for the world, actually. And echoing to some assumptions that have been elaborated here, I really believe that there's a leapfrog that's actually possible from a governance perspective. So my background is actually quite similar to Wasoko. So I'm coming from Brazil. I've been building the biggest lending platform for the new economy, so sort of like Silicon Valley Bank for Latin America. And after almost a decade of ups and downs, but let's just remember the ups, we ended up financing more digital entrepreneurs than the entire venture capital industry combined. And even after that, I still couldn't explain myself how, as an industry, as a digital industry, we could ship a smartphone in the hands of 93% of the Brazilian population, but as a society, we couldn't deliver like basic education and basic sewage to more than 25% of the population. And banking wouldn't solve that. The answer to that would be governance. And that's why basically I made a career shift to basically focus exclusively on this governance piece and mostly on boosting the main layers of social prosperity, I would say, more than economic prosperity. And to have social prosperity, you need to be very competitive with the future of work. It's been mentioned again in the last crypto conference, actually, that was in Prospera. Like a great urbanist mentioned this again, like the main reason why people go to another country or another city is jobs. 90% is jobs. And for this, we need to understand the future of work. So Africa is going to represent 40% of the workforce. But the workforce of the 21st century would be extremely different than the workforce of the 19th and 20th century. So AI is coming. The digital economy is here. The internet is more than a technology. Internet is a territory. Internet is a territory where you can build prosperity. So that's the manufacturing of the 19th century. And that's the global finance and service of the early 21st century. So we're really focused on that. And on top of capital tools and to make sure that capital markets and internet capital can actually flow into those special economic zones, we also make sure that businesses decide to incorporate in those zones. And the reason you incorporate is legal consideration, obviously, it's been highlighted here, but it's also, and mostly because you can raise money, equity or debt or any kind of other capital structures, and because you can sell your products and services. So we are really, really focused on building those commercial channels, connect legal interoperability, and connect capital markets, and use this as a wrapper that can run on top of special economic zones and charter cities. There are more than 5,000 special economic zones in the world. So there's an existing market to start with, but not all of those 5,000 made it through economic prosperity. So it's a necessary condition to build the special economic zone, but it's not enough. To make sure that those zones access prosperity, they need to build economic champions, and with this, people and family and businesses will naturally come in, and we build this with the best Web 2 and Web 3 tools to raise money and sell products and services.
Thank you, Hugo. Building off that point on jobs, maybe heading back to Daniel, one of the things I've been impressed by Daniel is he's not an expat founder who lives in London. He lives on the ground. He not only lives on the ground, he learns the language. And so I was shocked when we were in Rwanda and you were speaking fluent Kenyan Rwanda. And then here in Kenya, you're speaking fluent Swahili. Why have you made that decision to spend so much time locally, and what does that mean for the talent that you attract as a business?
Thanks, Justin. So, I think as we've talked about and some of the earlier examples have said, my experience on, how do we create economic opportunities, prosperity in Africa is really kind of bottom up, right? And it comes back to kind of understanding what is the bottleneck for creating jobs? What is it that is actually preventing businesses like myself or like Wasoko from scaling up, and why aren't there 1,000 more Wasokos? And I think to me, it comes down to what are the policies, what is that business environment, and then if you actually look at those policies, there's a few big levers. One of the ones that I think has just been most shocking to me is talent and the restrictions on talent for how teams can collaborate, especially across the African continent, to build world-class businesses. So right now, today, if you have a Nigerian, a Kenyan, an Egyptian, a South African, and you want to try to build a business together to tackle the opportunities across the continent, it is far, far easier for you to set up that team, your office in Dubai, than it is anywhere in Africa. And this to me is crazy. And it makes sense. All of us here know what Dubai has done to make the business environment as easy, as seamless as possible. And a big part of that is even just basic things like the visas. So if you have a job offer in Dubai, you automatically get a visa to go and work there. For me, if I'm running a business here in Kenya, trying to be Pan-African, which means I'm going to have people from, some of the 54 different countries, and I try to get a work visa for maybe a Nigerian or for an Egyptian, the immigration office comes to me and says, well, we want to see that, 95% of your staff are Kenyan. It's like, how are you going to build a Pan-African business if that's your policy? And you can look at the analogs of successful macro market integration. So in the EU, right? If you're doing the same thing, nobody would ever set up an office in Belgium if Belgium said 95% of your people have to be Belgian, right? They would say, no, I'm going to set my pan-European office up elsewhere. The fact that they don't have that kind of restriction, the fact that the EU has made the single market not just for goods but also for people, is a huge, huge unlock for why anyone continues to invest and do business in Europe. So I think it's the same opportunities and restrictions that we have to look at here. And there's a lot of talk about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. There's a lot less talk about one of the key components of that, which is the Protocol on Free Movement of People. And it's all about enabling Africans from any one of the 54 countries to be able to move, do business, set up companies, be employed in any of the other 53 countries that they might not be from. And so I think that to me is the number one kind of biggest barrier to how we leverage talent and how we leverage productive economic hubs, because we know that there are some countries, there are some places that might not be providing or creating as many economic opportunities. But if we can create zones, if we can create hotspots in certain places that are growing, that are creating jobs, we want those jobs to go to the best talent possible, whether or not they happen to be from that exact place. And by doing that, you're going to actually be unlocking and raising the bar even further. The final analogy I'll just give is, if you're trying to build a world-class club football team, you want to win the championship league, right? Imagine if Liverpool Football Club could only have English football players. They would be the worst team in the league, right? And so, to me, this is exactly the situation. Is like we should be trying to win at the global level. That means getting the best players from wherever. And you know what? The fact that England allows these international players to come play in their league, it makes the English players better. If they didn't have that competition, if they didn't have that opportunity to play alongside the best people from Egypt, Mo Salah or whoever else, they wouldn't be at that level. So that's what I'm really excited to hopefully see and to implement here across the continent in some of these zones and some of these partnerships. And I hope to see a lot more of those championship league level teams and companies being built on the continent as a result.
Well, lucky for you, Daniel, Mayowa is sitting right next to you, and he's building the Delaware for Africa. And I at least owe him and Etana credit for my own work visa in Nigeria. And so you've at least made it easier for me personally. Can you speak a little bit to the work that you're doing, Etana, and why you call yourself the Delaware for Africa?
I think, we're also one of those people that don't like to overflog the analogies of Delaware for Africa or Uber for dogs or literally anything. But, sometimes it's useful because here's the thing. Again, when you go out and meet customers or you talk to people about a special economic zone, it's some jargon, for the most part, particularly not for us who are involved in building them, but for those who are supposed to benefit or our customers or even the governments that we should align with. Where we've seen a lot of success is if we focus on the two key drivers around trust and around shared incentives. So we don't need to beg people, to partner with us or to be our customer or to come, set up in the zone. We build trust and we align on, hey, this is how this profits you. So for us, specifically on the Delaware for Africa situation, we compare ourselves with Delaware simply because of the fact that today, if you were interested in the American opportunity, you could, from the comfort of this hotel, register a new company in America, open a bank account, probably hire some staff, also get access to the services that you need as a business. Some of this stuff isn't even that complex. It is just enablement for the people who you want to come take advantage of what you're doing. So if the narrative helps us, we push it. But fundamentally, we want to align on the incentives that we all share. Obviously, this revolves around prosperity. But again, as I would say, one of the risks of these kinds of programs is to homogenize what special economic zones are. And I'm simply here to say they could simply be anything depending on the priorities of the territory at the point. And ideally, they are co-created between the government and, private stakeholders. So at some point, it could be, hey, we are seeing a strategic opportunity in improving the general health of the Nigerian population over the next 10 years. The kind of zone we need to create for that is very, very different than if we had the priority to mobilize capital, to mobilize talent, or if we had the priority to, boost hardware manufacturing or things like that. You have to do different things, which means even the idea of homogeneous zones is a bit, I think it has some friction with how we want to push the idea around what we do. We're doing this because it aligns fundamentally with Nigerian priorities, African priorities, and even the priorities of the global stakeholders who want to participate in the African opportunity.
So attracting global talent is certainly important, but also growing homegrown talent is as well. There was a late American senator, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who used to say, the best way to build a world-class city is to build 2 world-class universities and then wait 50 years. From my last count, Kanza now has 4 universities, and I just learned from your initial speech, over 150 incubation hubs. How do you think about universities in your role of building a great technology city?
At Consa being a government-led project, we're looking at universities as the pool of talent. Because the demographics at the ages at university are very young and they are versatile. Technology is agile. And these are the ladies and gentlemen who have all it takes to dream and promote talent locally. So as you have said, in Konza, we've really embraced that. Just to mention, I'd mention of the Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, which is master's and PhD and above. But you'd ask why it doesn't have undergraduate. It's because we're looking at the research coming out from Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology to go directly to the market. That the ecosystem which we have created at the Technopolis, which also has light industrial development and can attract global companies, then those companies would not then need to do their private R&D sessions, but then they'll be fed with new researches and improvements within the Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. As you've mentioned, we have the very first open university, actually at Konza Technopolis, led by government. And for the first time, you can actually take your degree, your diploma, and you get your certificate from the comfort of your home or as part-time education, where we are offering at half tuition degrees within our Open University of Kenya, which is actually at Konza Technopolis. And they're actually going on with the second cohort because the first cohort has already graduated. And for sure, as he has mentioned, government has to work with partners, private partners. And actually, we have a private investment who are doing their computing school at Konza Technopolis. They were given a charter just in March. And this is what we are creating, the pool of talent, which will then be used by this country to create the knowledge-based economy, which we really need in this country. And as you've mentioned, so far we have trained more than 2,000 different youths within the country. We are targeting to have a number of 2 million by the time we get to 2027, and that will be bringing back employment through digital jobs. Going higher and higher as we go towards the 2 billion GDP return in this country. So Konza is not just a job creation for physical developments or physical work, but we are more so on digital works, and for sure that can only be gotten through university education, from the certificate to diploma to the university level. So in Konza, you have looked at from the lowest level where we have Open University, which has certificates, diploma, degrees, to the level of PhD and final research within the Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. We have more opportunities open, and with your permission, I'll welcome everybody in this summit to visit Konza. It's just 60 kilometers along Mombasa Road, and we want to work with you so that you'll be part of the making of the smartest city in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And I can speak from experience. I visited Konza, I want to say 3 years ago, and I was impressed by how quickly everything was being built. And so maybe before we transition back to Hugo, please, I see that we have 2 questions in. You can submit questions based on the application. And so please submit if you have anything on your mind, and I'll open, of course, those questions up to everybody unless they're targeted at anybody specifically. Hugo, I want to dig a little bit deeper on what does digital rules and building digital infrastructure, and what can that unlock for new types of participation?
There was a panel before focused on supply chains, and it was really about traditional supply chains. And if I establish a similar parallel, I think that the latest, most modern version of special economic zone has to focus on the supply chain / the digital unit economics of the new economy. So I'll bring a few figures. Africa has 2 million engineers. The US have 1.5 million engineers. The GDP of the US is 27 times bigger than the GDP of Africa. And on a PPP adjusted basis, the GDP of the US is still 9 times bigger than the GDP of Africa. And it's not because of education, it's not because of the number of engineers. Education, at least for emerging economy standards in Africa, is good. I can tell you that Egyptian developers, Kenyan developers, Tanzanian developers, Nigerian developers are better than Argentine and Brazilian developers. And Brazil is one of the top 4 digital economies in the world, right? So it's not about the number of talents, you know. People like when I go to Mozambique, they speak a better Portuguese than mine. When I go to Ivory Coast, they speak a better French than mine. They know history better than me, and I studied history. So I think it's really about reclaiming the unit economics. And if we look at the unit economics of the internet, this is where this 1 to 10 or 1 to 30 gaps occurs. So what does a digital economy product looks like if we split the stack, like the new supply chains? It all starts with data, so data storage. So as we speak, maybe like everything that's happening on that room is probably being streamed, recorded with computing power and data storage, either in Germany or in Virginia, USA, right? So all this piece of the digital economy, unit economics go away. So that's also why it all started for us in East Africa with a partnership actually with our world, mostly to rebuild, the compute and storage level, to reclaim sovereignty at that level. And this is constitutional, so that's the new baseline. So reclaiming unit economics, reclaiming sovereignty at the same time. Then there's network connectivity, so how to build those critical infrastructures. Now there are other ways than just fiber cables. There are DPINs at the satellite levels, for instance, so you can rent a lot of connectivity, improving your unit economics. Then there's cost of funding. So interest rates are way too expensive, in Africa to make any small or mid-sized business competitive on a global scale and even on a local scale. There's no equity, so access to equity is extremely limited. Then there's cost of incorporation. It costs like 50K, 30K to relocate to either Dubai or Cayman or Mauritius. Mauritius is probably better because it's still Africa. And then there are taxes, right? So when you want to import products or import services, it typically ranges between 20% to 40% to 50% taxes sometimes. So all this adds to the stack of the unit economics of any kind of digital product. Then there are commercial channels. How do you want to sell? You will probably sell on AWS Marketplace. Again, 20% goes away, just in terms of distribution. You look at logistics, transportation, Uber, they take like a 30% take rate. It goes away to like a global centralized platform. So when you sum it all, you basically create a gap of like 10x, starting with a base of engineers that is even bigger than in the US. So what we are really focused in our infrastructures is to fix that gap and to fix those unit economics to be competitive in the digital economy. And this is what our protocol is about, from laws, from taxes, from compute, from storage, from distribution, from access to capital, from stablecoin. So we have like an entire menu, and our main KPI is to reclaim the unit economics of the digital economy at the special economic zone level.
I heard a stat, I think from Ed Glazier, that it's 24 cities comprise 95% of the global equity market cap. Of course, that is not GDP, but even so, if you think about the digital tools that you're bringing together, might be able to democratize access to equity financing and ensure that some of the other cities that are dynamic as the ones on the continent can contribute more on that scale. But now transitioning into some attendee questions. Thank you so much for those who have submitted. Attendee 1 has a great question. He or she says, historically, it was a labor-intensive industry that alleviated poverty on a mass scale. Can services achieve the same? Consider the example of China versus India.
Great question. I think the reality is that tech businesses or these kind of high-skill service jobs that tech companies tend to create, they're not going to replace the mass employment for lower-skilled blue-collar workers that we know is actually kind of the bulk of the employment gap needed in these economies. That being said, I absolutely believe that it is a critical ingredient in building a healthy overall competitive economy. And so, the example that I love looking at is Mauritius. 50 years ago, Mauritius had a GDP per capita that was approximately the same as Kenya's even back then. And what they did was they pursued a multi-pronged strategy that involved, first and foremost, textiles, which is part of the kind of garment strategy. And that was how they provided employment to the bulk of the population that did not have a higher skill base at the time. They did that by looking around at how to be globally competitive, at the time looking at the East Asian countries that were still at that garment level, and in some cases even bringing in the managers, the labor for that. My uncle was actually one of those people who migrated from Hong Kong to Mauritius to set up a textile factory back then. And but in addition to creating that sector and making it globally competitive, world class, they also built out their financial services industry, and they made Mauritius a hub with world-class capabilities for supporting financial services. And at the time, they didn't necessarily have the labor, the expertise to do that, but they opened themselves up, bringing people from London, from Switzerland, wherever else, to help establish that industry. And then over time, and the third thing they did was also the tourism. So of course, setting up world-class resorts, to enable the global population to come, invest, spend their money, enjoy a holiday there as well. And I think these are all core ingredients or core opportunities that many African economies on the mainland could also benefit from and could pursue as part of a diversified mix. But it really does kind of take that commitment to recognizing the opportunity, reducing the barriers, opening up to getting world-class talent to come set up and grow those initial hubs. And I think as part of a mix, the high-value services jobs that are created by tech companies, can be a big contributor and driver of the economy. It's not going to be the only thing. You're not going to be able to have 50% of the workforce employed in tech, but it can be a catalyst and a transformative ingredient as part of that larger economic transformation.
So I agree with Daniel. Also to the point that that's a very great question. I think the person asking is trying to cut to the chase of this conversation around the role that talent plays in the city's conversation that we're having. Well, my answer is I don't have an answer. However, I will tell you what I believe all of us in this segment are grappling with today. We're grappling with ideas coming from various schools of thought. And you can subscribe to multiple, and it's not mutually exclusive. There may be a school of thought that is of the opinion that, look, hey, automation is the real threat that, is implicit in these kinds of questions. What threat does automation have to this conversation that we have around talent? I subscribe, not that I don't subscribe to others, but I also subscribe to the school of thought that at the end of the day, automation, machines, etc., have typically been built to serve humans, and so they will always perform that function. Either it is helping us work better, producing things for us, etc., which implies that there will always be something for humans to do because we always want to do something and we want to use these machines to do those things. And that's the conversation around how jobs or economic agency evolves. However, there's also another group who is on the mountain that the value chain you can expect is that automation comes, and I was just discussing this actually with Daniel earlier. Automation comes, people get fired because there's no work for them to do. What that means is that there's less aggregate income because people don't have enough money to spend and they need to feed their families. And even though the machines can help us produce more, there's not enough agency to buy things. And so it spurs conversations like universal basic income and some of the other similar conversations that are floating around the world today, essentially implying that, hey, we can make more things because we have machines which have replaced talent in this hypothetical world, but we don't have enough agency to buy those things. And so do we start giving people things for free, or do we find a way to give people more economic agency in that world? So what I'm describing to you is basically some of the things that we are trying to figure out on a daily basis. The answer is that it's very tough to know exactly where this goes, but we are firmly of the opinion that there will always be a role for talent. And the idea is to look for ways to scale that.
Oh, what you both shared reminds me of what Danny Roderick, the economist who studied a lot of premature deindustrialization in Africa, he says there are only two ways historically that countries have gone from low income to high income. One is that they have massive amounts of resources and a low population, or they go through massive periods of industrialization, quantified by a majority of their GDP for more than 30 years or more being in industrialization. And so I don't think that's the future, though. I think in the wake of automation, and based on what the two of you just said, it's these multi-pronged strategies. You don't throw manufacturing out by any means. That has historically been one of the best ways to provide high-quality, high-paying jobs. But there are other ways now. And I think that is a great way to wrap to our last question of the panel, because unfortunately we're running out of time. I'd like to ask each of you, maybe in one or two sentences, if you have advice for city builders who are thinking about attracting great talent to the city, what advice would you give them?
So for city builders, I would advise them to look at a whole urban ecosystem where end-to-end talent can be built from the thought level to execution level to getting into the market. And in this time, we would say that also put in sustainability and green strategies in your urban areas. And that's why Konza, we call ourselves smart and sustainable city. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's wonderful. My idea will be two things around values and external alignment. What I mean by values is we don't know what exactly we need to create in these economic zones if we don't know what we want them to do for us. And that typically comes from the values that we have, which may evolve, or the priorities that we have, which may evolve at different points in time, or maybe even coexist at the same time, because we can prioritize health and also prioritize a thriving business environment for services, and also prioritize a thriving business environment for manufacturing or other sectors. So we could do multiple things, but they need to align with our values. And what that does, it helps to reduce the friction between the participants and the territory, because now you can find it easier to align on policies, to align on support, and to align on partnerships. Now, the external alignment aspect of this is the point where we don't create things in isolation of our environment. So in a hypothetical world where there were just two countries and one country prioritized, manufacturing of bottled water, and the other person prioritized the same exact thing, where is that going to be sold? In that world, you need to be very conscious about what's going on around you, how the world is evolving, technology, the trends in talent, the cultural nuances. Those are the things that help you understand how you participate in this, unique setups that we are calling the special zones.
My advice to zone builders on attracting talent would be to really think about what is your value proposition to top 1% global talent to becoming part of your zone. The reason why is those individuals, whether they're coming from the US or China or Nigeria or wherever, they're going to be the founders, the entrepreneurs, the people who are actually building up the large companies, institutions that are going to create maximum economic opportunity at a world-class competitive level. And so what is that value proposition? And then how are you making it as easy and seamless as possible for that talent to get involved?
Mine would be quite opposite to any economic or digital consideration, because I think with talents like this panel, I think Africa will make it. So I think we will very soon have a very good economic infrastructure, legal infrastructure, talent infrastructure, and digital infrastructure. So I take it for granted. In the global scenario, I think what city developers need to create is our stories. So the stories need to be the most powerful stories in the world. People went 2 centuries ago to the United States, not because they were counting the number of pages in the Constitution, or not because they were doing FX maths, but because they wanted to live the American dream. So city developers need to build the most compelling stories of humanity to build the next African dream for humanity. And considering that all the rest follows, and I think that now with the web, with the internet, with crypto, with compute, with storage, with platforms, I think Africa is very, very close to be soon at par with the rest of the world, not to say even better. But I don't think that mostly Europe or China or the US in 2025 can propose like such an interesting social and cultural contract with a vibrant culture, connection to nature, ancestrality, vibrant art, amazing music, beautiful things, and package all this into a very attractive story. So if I would be a city developer, I would really, really focus on that story with the assumption that the rest will follow.
Thank you, Hugo. And cities ultimately benefit from agglomeration. They reduce the cost of the transport of goods, people, and maybe most importantly, ideas. And talent has always been the thing that has created that type of urban magic that we are all trying to capture while we build new cities. And seeing folks like yourselves who are attracting that type of urban talent, who are creating that type of urban talent, it makes me feel, really glad to be a part of this community and happy and energized to be here today. And so with that, please join me in thanking our distinguished group of panelists.